when Luke Skywalker was most vulnerable.
This is a dangerous time for you. It is you and your abilities the Emperor wants.
When a renegade hero became a friend in desperate need. And a dark villain faced his greatest challenge.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
When the Empire turned more and more to the forces of the underworld.
Bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
The underworld moved in to crush the Empire and the Rebellion in a single stroke. After The Empire Strikes Back and before Return of the Jedi, there was a time when heroes and villains alike lived in the shadows of the Empire.
What most people think is just a video game for the N64 was actually a multimedia project from 1996 that came out before the Star Wars prequel trilogy and the special editions. Riding off the momentum of the Thrawn novels and the growing popularity of games like TIE Fighter and Dark Forces, Shadows was one of the boldest multimedia campaigns by Lucasfilm that didn't involve a film, and would use all of Lucasfilm's licensing deals to create a movie without a movie. It'd be treated as seriously as a film, with a novel to establish the plot, a revolutionary video game for a new system, a Dark Horse comic series with extra scenes that aren't in any other media, official toys to add to the already expansive Star Wars toy line, and even an original orchestral soundtrack. In this video, we're gonna dive in for the full storyline and the making of Shadows of the Empire. In 1994, Lucasfilm was preparing for the release of the Star Wars Special Editions, which is the original trilogy, but there are infamous changes, such as Greedo shooting first, the weird Sarlacc thing, and a little ship we might recognize in a little bit. Also, a quick reminder to look up Harmy's Despecialized Edition. It's the only way to watch the theatrical release of Star Wars in high definition, but you didn't hear that from me. So with the special editions and prequels coming soon, Lucasfilm saw an open time frame in 1996 that was prime real estate for a new Star Wars story to thrive. So while Lucasfilm was discussing a future book with Bantam Books, their novel licensee at the time, an editor named Lou Aronica pitched that the books should be just as powerful to readers as the films were to viewers, and he recommended using pre-existing licensing deals to create a multimedia adventure, where they would advertise everything except for a feature film. Internally, people would start referring to this project as a movie without a movie. But this wasn't Lucasfilm's first foray into a multimedia project. Defenders of Dynatron City was their first multimedia experiment, with a cartoon pilot, toys, comics, and a game. And while it didn't actually pan out for Lucasfilm, they had learned from this project, and that experience would translate into Shadows of the Empire.
Ugh, thinking is boring. Let's just smash down the factory, blow up everything in sight, and pound Mayhem's head into a shattered bag of skull fragments. What do you think?
I think that's my kind of plan! Let's go!
No!
So then it was time to decide where in the timeline this new project would take place. But Lucasfilm had overlooked overlapping continuity until 1991, when the first book of the Thrawn trilogy was released, Heir to the Empire. This book sold incredibly well, becoming the first Star Wars bestseller, and as the Thrawn trilogy unfolded, it was widely recognized as the sequels that were never made. The Thrawn trilogy reignited fan interest in Star Wars, and Lucasfilm saw the untapped potential in the extended universe they had. But there was a problem. Numerous side stories had been written for Star Wars in the 70s and 80s. Before the 90s, there had been no real continuity management, so positions were created internally to monitor the lore. Efforts started to reorganize what's canon and what's retconned to maintain a continuous, unbroken story of Star Wars. Old media had to be scrapped. Even the first novel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, where Luke bitch slaps Leia and they have a mud fight. Luke chops Vader's arm off and Vader trips over his own arm and falls into a hole. And there's a weird implied romance. What the fuck is going on in this book? And then there's the Marvel comics from the 70s where Han Solo teams up with a 6-foot green rabbit named Jackson. Fun fact, he was actually referenced in a Clone Wars episode. So Lucasfilm devised a new canon sorting system that ranked from G, being the most important canon standing for George Lucas films, all the way down to N canon. What-if stories and parodies, like the Infinities comics where Luke misses the shot on the Death Star, Leia turns to the dark side, Yoda takes control of the Death Star, which is now the Justice Star, and kamikazes the Justice Star into Coruscant to kill the Emperor, which is pretty good. So Lucasfilm wanted this multimedia project to take place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. But during discussions at Lucasfilms, Jon Knoles, artist and game designer at LucasArts, sent a memo to Lucasfilm recommending that the new story actually take place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi instead. This was because at the end of Empire, there were more cliffhanging, dramatic possibilities. Also introduced in Empire were a slew of cool new bounty hunters, adding a new element of a shadowy underworld to the galaxy. So the plan was to tell the same story from different perspectives. They would have a novel by Bantam Books that would look at the story and overall conflict between the Rebels, Empire, and a new criminal organization, the Black Sun. A video game from LucasArts to focus on action sequences from the eyes of a console-exclusive character. And the Dark Horse comics would give additional perspective from everyone's favorite bounty hunter, the Mandalorian, from Disney Plus's Mandalorian, and Baby Yoda. The first ideas for Shadows began at Skywalker Ranch with Lucy Wilson and Howard Rothman of Lucasfilm. At the time, they just came up with a very few major plot points written that had yet to be fleshed out. It pretty much just consisted of an assassination plot against Luke, Luke has a new bodyguard character, and there's an overlord of the underworld involved. These initial story ideas were taken to a key meeting in November of 1994 between Lucasfilm executives and most, if not all, of the licensees, such as LucasArts, Dark Horse, and Bantam Books, including an author from Bantam Books who is set to write the novel, Steve Perry. He had previously written for Bantam Books, including an Alien series, and he even had his own series called The Matador, which was about an ex-soldier fighting against a galactic confederation. So he was a pretty good pick to write a Star Wars novel.
This motherfucker don't miss.
No, he's fucking good.
That motherfucker don't miss, man.
But that's not entirely why he was picked for Bantam for Shadows. He had written a last-minute, low-paying, royalty-free job for his editor at the time, Tom Dupree, for a novelization of The Mask. Although it was low-paying, he did it because he thought it'd be fun, and the timing couldn't have been better. Since he had done his boss this favor, he was repaid by getting a recommendation for this new Star Wars novel. So during this key meeting in November 1994, Perry mentions that there were numerous ideas coming from every direction, for every medium. This led to discussions like who was the star of the video game, which was originally going to be Boba Fett. We'll go into that more when we talk about the video game. That idea was actually adapted into the Dark Horse comics instead, as a side plot throughout the 6 issues. Other ideas that were bounced around during this meeting were that Lucasfilm actually wanted Leia to be completely seduced by Shizor instead of resisting his seduction. But ideas like this were changed during the meeting, and this is why it was important for them to hash out ideas during this brainstorming session. Where Shizor might have been a misunderstood leader of the underworld that Leia might fall for, sort of a Han Solo type, they thought it'd be better for Shizor to be a coldly calculating, arrogant, sociopathic leader of the Black Sun, and that Leia would stay loyal to Han. All of these discussions proved beneficial to the book, game, and comics. And after taking plenty of notes, Perry went off to go write the novel, sticking to a general outline of the major plot beats. The rebels are hunting Boba Fett to save Han Solo. A new villain emerges, the leader of a criminal syndicate, the Black Sun, who's in a power struggle with Vader to become the Emperor's second-in-command, trying to make Vader look inept by killing Luke Skywalker. Luke is finishing his new lightsaber and Jedi training at Ben Kenobi's house, followed by an exciting swoop chase through Beggar's Canyon by his assassins sent by Shizor. The rebellion is baited into attacking a freighter containing the second Death Star plans that is purposely given by Shizor. Leia takes a dangerous gambit to find the ones behind the assassination on Luke, leading to a seduction and test of will by Shizor. And finally, the gang rescues Leia in a final confrontation between all 3 sides, the Rebellion, Empire, and Black Sun, that takes place on Coruscant. The outline was approved by Lucasfilm, but they told Perry to amp up the Godfatherish feeling of the book. when it came to the Black Sun at least. Then after that, Perry was given total creative control. Also in this book, Perry wrote Teras Kasi into the Star Wars universe. It's based on one of many forms of Pencak Silat, which I definitely just butchered that name. But he was an instructor for this Indonesian martial arts style. So we have him to thank for this gem of a PS1 game. He finished the first draft in 4 months and describes working with people at Skywalker Ranch as being easy to get along with, helpful, and not suits that are gonna give you a lot of corporate flack. At the end of this video, we're gonna fully cover the plot, so there's a timestamp in the description if you want to jump right to the lore. But don't do that, because we're just getting started. With the new story came new characters, ships, and locations that required a consistent design across all media. Lucasfilm hired artist Mike Butkus, who had previously done character art for the Star Wars Essential Guide to Characters, as well as an in-house style guide for Star Wars in general. He was given the task of conceptualizing the new original characters. Butkus reminisces how he found a secluded Southern California beach with his boxer pup, set up a tent and a campfire near some surfers and an old man selling burgers, and sketched up concept art until sundown. What a life. For Shizor, he'd pop in a tape of Danny Elfman's Batman soundtrack for a darker, seedy but commanding mood. And for Dash Rendar, Elvis, 60s rock and roll. When Shizor's design was translated to the book cover, comic, and video game, the design was mostly unchanged from Butkus's original sketches. But Dash Rendar, on the other hand, and his co-pilot Lebo, and the new ships, all came from a different source. Dash Rendar was only a minor character in the book and comic, and he was the character of the video game. So Jon Knoles from LucasArts talks about how they would take charge of Dash's design.
I think the comic book artist had some really great ideas. Killian Plunkett was his name. He thought of him as the pirate Han Solo wished he could be, right? Like the guy, the really rough guy. Like Han Solo has a heart, maybe Dash Rendar doesn't, right? You know, Han Solo always ends up doing the right thing. Maybe this guy doesn't. And he was wild looking, crazy, long hair, scarred, just a spooky looking dude. I thought that was cool, but there's no way we could actually render that in 75 to 150 polygons or whatever I had to work with at the time. He's going to be a blocky guy. He can't have long flowing hair. Meanwhile, the novelist wanted him to look very dashing and regal and have long flowing red hair and a cape and shiny stuff. So he's kind of like where Han Solo is just kind of the working man smuggler. This guy is the really slick professional smuggler, more like Lando, I guess. And that wouldn't work either for us. They were amazing drawings, but when I saw a couple of those sketches, I was just like, he looks like one of them. He looked like a big-haired heavy metal rocker from the '80s with a cape. I mean, all he needed was a guitar instead of a gun, and it would have been like the new member of whatever band. So I was like, no, I got to convince everybody that we have to make him look more lived in, more worn. Star Wars was a world where everybody wore like functional clothes. Their spaceships were beat up, at least in the original trilogy. It's a lived in, banged up world that George envisioned so that people would connect with it, right? And that wasn't just how it looked, it was how it sounded. Like all the things, you didn't hear spacey sounds. Things sounded like real machines.
Oh yeah? Watch this.
That just made it feel like it should be no different you watching these guys get into a spaceship and fly off as you get into your car and you drive off. This is just how it is. So I wanted to be that authentic to these characters, and in a way, Dash's crazy shoulder pads don't really fit that. So I was kind of stuck in the middle of that, trying to piece it all together and say, well, it affects us more than it affects the novel or the comics right now, so let us figure it out. So I started working out some outfit ideas, and we had to give him some big hulky shoulder pads to hide the fact that in those days we didn't have smooth joints for characters. So You would see the arm penetrate into the body in weird ways. Effectively, every joint is like a capsule that's pushed into each other, and it looks really bad if you can't figure out a way to hide it. So that's where the shoulder pads came in. And it was a constant back and forth between Lucasfilm licensing, the novelists, the comic book artists, ourselves, just to try to find a look that everybody was in agreement with. And I think we ended up driving most of that for the game, but he ended up becoming an amalgamation of many different people's ideas, and therefore kind of didn't really have that much of an identity. That was actually, not how you go about designing a video game character in retrospect, but he had a role to serve, and he served his role, so,
I think
it ended up working. It was also hard to try to maintain a consistent appearance for him because, everyone else is based on an actor, right? Our storyboard artist hired a model to pose for him, to do all these poses for the cinematics, and I ended up taking those and scanning them and painting them in the computer. But he was a really young guy. He was like 20, in his early 20s. He had dark, short hair, and he didn't really look like we thought Dash should look like. So I always had to do something to age him up, rough him up a bit. We didn't really model high-res 3D characters back in those days. That was just starting out as a thing, right? And so we didn't have like a high-res model we could use and pose. And so it was really, that was a challenge actually for me, was trying to make him look the same scene to scene. Like in some scenes he looks like that model, some scenes he looks like Kevin Costner, some scenes he looks like Michael Pare, the actor from Streets of Fire. It's just, I don't know why. I don't know that we were necessarily looking at those guys, but maybe I was subconsciously thinking of them as I was doing it. And I just wanted to give him the same blaster Han Solo and Luke rolled around with, because that was always my favorite one. So, we didn't really come up with any fancy there.
DL-44. It's the best.
This is based on a Mauser. The idea of him running around with a big gun didn't seem very Star Warsy, so we gave him a little blaster. So, not quite the most exciting video game action character accessory when you think about it, but it worked out.
Knowles also designed Lebo, Dash's droid companion and co-pilot.
Yeah, I designed him, and his name came from a coworker, Mike Levine. His nickname was Lebo, and it just sounded like a great droid name, so just change it to LB02D9 or something like that, and Lebo for short. And some of that was inspired by the Han Solo adventure novels, where he had this droid named Blue Max, who was kind of his sidekick back in the day. And it's fun too, because the Solo movie, the droid played a big part in the Solo movie too, so that was kind of fun. Ship was one of the things I'm most proud of. I had sketched some ideas for that ship that I just wasn't happy with at all. I didn't think they looked Star Warsy, honestly. Doug Chang, who's the brilliant concept artist who's famous for all the prequels and all that stuff, he was actually designing lots of things for the special edition at the time, spaceships, speeder bikes, or swoops. He was offered up to me as someone I could turn to for help, so I did. I asked him to help design the ship. We both agreed it should be asymmetrical. The name kind of implies it. Outrider brings to mind outriggers on a boat. I don't know. These are the things artists think about. And he also loved that idea, so he just took and he delivered up a sketch that was amazing. As soon as I got it, I just ran to my computer and I fired up 3D Studio, and then that became the high-res version of the Outrider, which then I had to make the blocky one that you see in game. But yeah, it was that was cool. That ship did age well, actually. Not many things in that game aged well, but the ship did. It's a freighter, but it's also fast and agile, and it's a mashup between the B-Wing and a Falcon conceptually. Originally, the cockpit would rotate independently of the rest of the ship, right? Just like a B-Wing. I ended up making the cockpit a lot more like the Millennium Falcon because it was just easier to do at the time from a technical point of view. And so our cockpit did not rotate independently from the ship. So I think the toy ended up doing it. And the toy took a wild departure, in terms of the design, but it was still cool to see those things come together.
Shizor's ship, the Virago, was another one of Shang's designs. This ship also became the standard Star Viper fighter of the Black Sun's Navy, and one of the coolest goddamn ships around.
Yeah, that's another one of Doug's designs, and yeah, it was a brilliant sketch, and there were probably 2 or 3 of us who ended up building that model, actually. but I'm the one who had to animate it, so I had to make sure the wings actually folded in properly. And Doug, because he was an industrial designer, everything he designs is designed to work, right? So you go off his sketches, and it's really easy to see how, I see this piece folds into that piece and folds into this piece and it rotates at that angle. And so it was actually pretty easy to bang that together.
I've seen pulse cannons and gladiator droids. I've seen Beggar's Canyon and Imperial sewers. I've seen dead ends and infinite space. I've seen 360 degrees of tomorrow, and for once, lived to tell about it. Because I've got the ultimate fighting machine.
Around the time that Shadows was in talks at Lucasfilm, Nintendo requested a game from LucasArts for their new Project Reality system, which would eventually be the Nintendo 64.
So I would always work like 3 days a week on the Super Nintendo games and a couple days a week on X-Wing and then TIE Fighter and then the expansion. So I was doing a lot of that work, and I believe at that point we had started to hear rumors of this thing called Project Reality, and it was Nintendo's new system. And we had an early dev kit, and we hired 3 brilliant guys from Spectrum Holobyte, which was a flight sim company in the Bay Area. But those guys were well versed in all things SGI, and it was a silicon graphics-based machine, so we needed some experts in that tech. And we were just sort of told to sit around and think of something to come up with. And we were going to do Western. I was already a little bit, burned out from Star Wars, so started to cook up ideas of a console-style spaghetti Western. Had a train in low 3D that was snaking through a canyon as one of our first tests, and it was kind of mind-blowing. Like, none of us had ever, we'd seen games when you're on a train, and it's usually a static train that might be going up and down a little bit with a background scrolling on either side. But you'd never be on a train that was an actual 3D object moving through a world and rolling and banking and turning through canyons, or being a character on that train jumping while it's moving. And
sounds familiar.
Yeah, one of the worst levels in the game. But it didn't take long to realize that it was kind of fruitless to try to have a launch title for this new system that wasn't tied to Star Wars. I mean, it just made sense. It kind of came down as, hey, there's a multimedia type thing that Lucasfilm is thinking of doing to sort of continue the momentum that the games were starting to build and the Timothy Zahn novels were starting to build, in this sort of resurgence of Star Wars, which had been almost 20 years. And I think they wanted to really ramp up for the re-release of the movies with a special edition with some sort of new multimedia project. And so the idea was, because we're all one Lucas family, LucasArts, Lucasfilm Licensing, and ILM and all those groups, there was a lot of talking going on to try to work together towards something. So Shadows of the Empire kind of was the result of that.
So LucasArts was set up to make a Shadows of the Empire game, but they still had to decide what kind of game they were going to make and what it was about.
I had a real soft spot for the bounty hunters and sort of that underworld of Star Wars, and that was the world that I wanted to play in, and I thought other Star Wars fans like myself would want to play in, as opposed to playing Luke and Han Solo again and again and again and just retreading the movies. And that time period, was kind of their little moment in the sun, right? Where you met all the bounty hunters in Empire Strikes Back. And as much as I'm a huge Han Solo fan, that's why I'm in his ship right now, I knew that he'd be frozen at this particular time. But the really cool story and the character I wanted to be the star of the game was actually Boba Fett. And so the concept was Boba Fett battling competing bounty hunters who are trying to steal Han Solo from him as he tries to get from Cloud City to Tatooine. And you could make a whole bunch of great stories out of that. And that's kind of a compelling character to play. He looks really cool. He's got all these weapons. It's Boba Fett. And he never got to really be a star at that point. He'd shown up in some of our games in a side scroller as an enemy. I think we had him in Empire Strikes Back as an enemy, and I think he made a cameo appearance in Dark Forces. So that was the goal, and we were going to go with that. And then at some point, word came down that Nintendo wanted, which is a polite way of saying demanded, that there be a character the character you play is exclusive to the Nintendo for some amount of time. I can't remember, a year, or it wouldn't be on any other console for some amount of time. So that meant you couldn't play any of the core characters. It had to be a new character. So it couldn't be Boba Fett, couldn't be Han, couldn't be Luke, any of those things. So we had to come up with a character. And simultaneously, the novelist needed a character to sort of fill the vacuum that Han Solo left. You need a tough, gruff, space pirate guy who can smuggle guns and get things done, and ultimately became Dash Rendar, who became the player character. Not as cool as Boba Fett would have been, but sometimes you're given a box and you got to figure out how to work within it.
Back when LucasArts made the Super Star Wars series for Super Nintendo, it was critically acclaimed, large in part to the multiple game modes throughout the game. It wasn't just side-scrolling platforming, but there were Mode 7 segments that made it feel like an epic adventure when it changed from level to level. For the N64 game, they would take the same idea for Shadows of the Empire, but expand on it. And each of the gameplay modes for Shadows of the Empire would pull from their previous games at LucasArts. There were low-altitude and free space flight levels that was inspired by TIE Fighter. There were on-rail shooting galleries, like Rebel Assault. There was a high-speed bike chase, and third-person shooting levels reminiscent of Dark Forces, except now the player can switch between first-person, third-person, bird-person, and fourth-person? But it turns out multiple genres would not work out that well in early 3D on a brand new console as easily as it did in the 2D games.
In my experience in the Super Star Wars games, you'd spend some levels running around, blasting stuff, and then you'd get on a speeder bike. And that mix was really appreciated by fans and critics alike. It's honestly the kind of thing, you expect to see that kind of thing when you see a Star Wars movie, and this is supposed to feel like a movie without a movie, so we can't just have you, running around hallways or just flying a ship. And, in retrospect, I never would have done that. It's a really scary way to, get yourself into a design hole, right? You're just making 5 or 6 games instead of one. And that puts a lot of pressure, especially on a really small team that we had, to try to do any one of those things really well. And, I think the game suffered from it a little bit. And the first thing we did, and the most successful thing we did, and the thing that ended up spawning the entire Rogue Squadron series, which was fantastic, was the snowspeeder battle. Yeah, and Dash was not in the Battle of Hoth, but, we just snuck him in there and said, well, he could have been, right? He's a hotshot pilot. He could have been there to help the Rogue guys. But it was really, we want the player to experience that snow battle from The Empire Strikes Back. We're going to work it into the story, even though it has nothing to do with the story that's going on with the novel or the comics. It was really about, that's an experience we wanted to nail. And I suppose we could have done a snowspeeder battle on another planet, or you could have flown the Outrider around the legs of a walker, but that wasn't what we were after. We were after scene that they will always remember for the rest of their lives, and just start the game off that way. And it also gives us a chance to kind of have Han and Dash, share a couple words before Han disappears, right? Because that's kind of, they knew each other, all these Corellian guys must know each other. Maybe if we'd done more of that and a little less of some of the other stuff, I think the game might have benefited from it. But there is that, feeling that players expect to do lots of different kinds of things and experience all the things that they see in a movie. So trying to weigh those against each other was always a challenge. And Nintendo Japan did have somebody sort of on site with us, embedded with us for a while, which was both helpful and stressful at the same time. The controller was so top secret that no one was allowed to see it outside of our group. So no one had ever seen an analog control before. And at the time, they didn't have the form factor yet, so it didn't look like the Nintendo 64 controller. But what we had was a thing in a box, and the box had 2 holes cut in the side. And you had to put your hands through the 2 holes when you were playing it so that no one could see what you were holding. And so, other coworkers would come by and say, well, what's it like? And we'd make up all kinds of ridiculous stuff, like, what's like this gelatinous ball? And you just move your finger slightly and it can totally, we just made up all kinds of stories.
The LucasArts team would also get feedback from Miyamoto, who was always adamant that you should be able to see Dash's feet. but recommendations like that would more work for a Mario game, not so much a third-person shooter.
I was trying to do a camera that was like Mario's camera. It just doesn't work in a shooter. You know, the standard two-stick shooter paradigm that we're all familiar with. Left stick is, you know, forward, back, left, right, and right stick is look around. That works. We were trying to do other things that just didn't work as well. It was weird enough to get this controller that you held in the middle, and it had this really cool analog stick that nobody ever seen anything like that before. And you had another little analog stick for a camera because it was designed for Mario. One is for the camera, one is for the character. So we ended up mapping all the aiming and movement to the left stick, which is a little weird. And it's also a little difficult to make a third-person shooter where you're far away from your character, as far away as we were. I mean, unless you're going into like an aim mode, right? Like Gears and Uncharted do, right? We just hadn't figured all those things out back then.
But regardless of the odd control scheme, the game was still groundbreaking for both console shooters and the Star Wars movie experience.
This idea that you could run through a world that you saw in the movies and have the Millennium Falcon fly over you as you're running through there and be like, oh, I'm in the movie. I mean, that was really mind-blowing back then. Or to be running around underneath one of the two-legged walkers as it's stomping around. I mean, it was a perspective nobody had ever had before, and you are the camera, so you're running around looking at it from all kinds of angles, and that was a unique experience. And I remember the first time we showed the game, people were kind of blown away by it. It was state of the art.
Welcome to our Star Wars, Super Mario, and Street Fighter Alpha 2 hint video. This is so jam-packed that we're going to get started right now with Shadows of the Empire.
Levels like Gaul, Spaceport, which was this vast, sprawling thing that you could see forever, and it took you like 20 minutes of walking and jumping and running to get there and figure out what path you're going to take. I mean, that was really cool in those days. Like, you didn't really get that sense of space in a console game, in a shooter. Most shooters were all set in hallways, and Dark Forces had done that the year before. And I was lucky enough to get a bunch of their level designers on Shadows, that they wanted to bring that same idea into Shadows. And for a lot of them, it was even more exciting to do that because of the way they got to build it. And the best way I can describe it is, in the early days of shooters, you weren't actually building geometry in a world, you were chiseling a world out of a block, if that makes sense. You're creating negative space. And that's why you were always in hallways. And the Dark Forces team were the first ones, I think, to figure out how to fake it and make you feel like you were in a vast world, right? That aesthetic they brought gave the game its scale. But yes, it didn't age very well. It's a very low poly world, very small textures that you have to stretch across very large walls. And so there's this weird aesthetic. You're trying to make something that looks kind of real and lived in, like the films or like a first-person shooter at the time, like Dark Forces, but you would have nowhere near the memory, right? Nowhere near the bandwidth to do the kind of textures you want to do. So it almost created its own look. It's very sharp and pointy and with blurry textures and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, as an artist, it was always frustrating. You're just like, oh my God, this is going to look terrible. But the overall effect was so new and novel and interesting that I think we looked past that. You know, going back, you always want to make sure the visual look of the game can be supported by the hardware you're building it for, right? So I think the best looking N64 games in those early days were games that just put more reliance on simple, clean, beautiful graphics, like Mario, like Pilot Wings. But GoldenEye, they were kind of doing a similar approach we were, right? They're trying to make it look as realistic as you can. But they got a whole nother year. And IG-88 was one of the coolest bosses I think we'd seen in a game in a while. That dude was just scary. He was everywhere.
He was scary.
He had some clever AI pathing that he somehow always managed to jump right in front of you and scare you. So, I mean, there was some cool stuff in there. And then when The Mandalorian, you know, comes out and you see IG-11 doing all of his amazing stuff, I can say, well, you know, I did it first.
We made it cool, all right?
We were one of the first teams to use motion capture. ILM had a motion capture rig set up to do the Casper movie, I think, that they were working on, Casper the Friendly Ghost. the technology at the time was really crude. Like the actors they still have to wear lots of dots, but they had to wear dots connected to wires that were all connected to a train, kind of like VR helmets are now, right? You're leashed to a bank of computers. So the actor couldn't really move much more than 10 feet. Dash running is just me hand animating a model because we couldn't actually get motion capture of somebody running. And now they have, places where, just professional studios that they can have a horse on a treadmill, in motion capture. I think when you shoot a stormtrooper, there's still some motion capture in there, but there's honestly not much the rest of the game.
I would like to see Dash on a horse, riding on a train, shooting some stormtroopers.
Yeah, I would like to say that was something we cut, Dash on some sort of cool running creature, but no, we didn't have that one.
Unfortunately, Shadows didn't make the Nintendo 64 launch in North America, but it did release by Christmas of the same year. The PC version of the game came out about a year afterwards, with fully animated and voiced cutscenes. Dash Rendar was voiced by John Saigon, known for other gaming roles such as Solidus Snake in Metal Gear Solid 2, and Mandalore from the KOTOR games.
When we finished the N64 version of the game was just going to be effectively ported up to the PC as best as possible without a whole lot of changes to the content itself besides cinematics. So I assembled a small cinematics team, of which I was included, and we did a bunch of full motion video sequences that we used instead of the sort of 2D cinematics from the other game, and had voice and all this kind of stuff, which made it a bit more immersive, I think. The cinematics we did for the PC version came out really well, except for the talking head stuff. Those are terrible. The Dash Rendar, face and a Luke face and a Leia face, and the camera should never get that close to an asset that is that crude. We were so proud of the fact that we had lip-syncing faces. We really weren't at the cutting edge of facial animation and rendering, so we probably should have dialed that back. But the spaceships shots, all the action shots, those came out pretty well. And we are also one of the very first games to ship with a 3D accelerator support, because that was a whole new thing. The 3D accelerator cards were just starting to come out. It took us about 6 months, I think, to bang together a good PC version after we shipped the N64 game. It did like 10 times what anybody thought it would in terms of sales. So that turned out to be pretty cool. And you can play it at a higher frame rate, which is always a better experience.
Although the game wasn't received the best critically, it sold above expectations on both PC and Nintendo 64. And despite the game's flaws in aged controls and graphics, the pros outweigh the cons, and it retains a cult status among gamers and Star Wars fans to this day. It also helped usher in a new generation of Star Wars fans during the renaissance of lore in the 1990s.
So, I wouldn't have made 6 games in one. I still don't know which stuff I would have cut, but I know I would have cut at least half of those modes of gameplay, just so we could spend more time polishing the ones that we know worked. I know that the low altitude flight stuff, and even the space flight stuff, honestly, worked really well. There would be no Rogue Squadron series had there not been Shadows, right? Factor 5 is awesome. We had a lot of guys from Lucas working at Factor 5 around the corner from us making those games. So absolutely not taking away anything from that, but we literally handed them the code to Shadows of the Empire and said, hey, why don't you guys go make a whole game that just does this? Because the big lesson we came out of that was just do one thing and do it really well, right? So I'm proud of the legacy that Shadows left, because that core team and I went on to do Pod Racer, which was doing one thing and doing it really well, we think. Rogue Squadron was doing one thing and doing it really well. And we were able to kind of carry all that knowledge that we had learned forward. So I'm kind of proud of that more than anything else. I'm bummed that we didn't exactly hit the launch date of the console. I think we came out a month or two later, like almost at the end of December. But I am proud of the fact that we did get it done. Like, nobody told us we get another year, like those GoldenEye guys. But we did get it done, and it was very successful. I mean, critically mixed, understandably so. It was tough too, because it was being compared against the only other games like it, which were on PC, which could do so much more. So, these guys just got done playing Dark Forces, and they expect to get that plus more on the console. And so it was kind of hard because I had just come from, a whole string of games where every review that was written was like, double thumbs up, for Super Star Wars or the X-Wing and TIE Fighter series. So that was the first time I'd worked on a game that, got some bad reviews, and that was kind of tough for me, but it was all a learning lesson, right? But yeah, proud of the very small team that put together something no one had ever seen on a console before. That was pretty cool.
In the early 90s, Lucasfilm had a license deal with Varis Saraband Records, who had already published 4 albums for a TV series called The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Lucy Wilson at Lucasfilms had previously proposed the idea of composing a full soundtrack for a Star Wars novel. It was originally intended, though, for the Thrawn trilogy, but it never happened. They decided to revisit the idea for Shadows of the Empire. Joel McNeely, a Primetime Emmy Award winner for his work on The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, was set up to compose the soundtrack for Shadows. But he initially turned it down because he was trying to work on other films at the time. But when 2 weeks opened up in his schedule, he took the role and wrote the entire soundtrack in 2 weeks. McNeely used events from different chapters of the book to inspire the sound of each track, even using original concept art by Ralph McQuarrie to visualize what was happening. Unlike a film score, it was composed with no visual timing of a film. This means that McNeely could place himself in any scene and stay there as long as he wanted. And he had creative authority over the pacing of the soundtrack. The pieces from this soundtrack were used in the video game and the original audiobook. And although it was completely original, there are still stings of John Williams' music throughout the album, like the Imperial March, or the Force theme. After the soundtrack was written, it was recorded by the Royal Scottish National Orchestra and released in April of 1996 on CD and cassette. The CD also included a program that could be ran on Windows 3.1 computers that had biographies, concept art, advertisement material, and all sort of extra information for Shadows of the Empire. The soundtrack invokes the sound of the original Star Wars trilogy, but instead of sounding too much like John Williams' scores, it was a bit darker toned and more sinister. It was a very well-received addition to the Shadows project, but in retrospect, McNeely is critical of his own soundtrack and regrets writing it in only 2 weeks. One of the more memorable tracks, thanks in part to the video game, is The Destruction of Shizor's Palace. This track includes some epic, sinister choir chants, but these chants aren't just nonsensical words. It was a new Star Wars language. McNeely had went to Ben Burtt from Lucasfilm, a sound designer and creator of some of the most iconic sounds in Star Wars. Burtt was also a creator of alien languages, so McNeely asked Burtt to write a poem, one that would have guttural syllables to be used in the soundtrack, so Burtt wrote Da Werda Verda, a poem mixing Germanic language elements, creating an ancient Coruscant language. Burtt never gave a translation for this poem, but he told the story to McNeely that was an ancient story of violence and romance, of 2 ancient warring races, the Tong and the Zell, battling on Coruscant eons ago, when suddenly a volcanic eruption wiped out the Zell. The Tong survived and lived in the shadow of the volcanic fallout for years, naming themselves the Warriors of the Shadow, aka Da Werda Verda. Anyways, the site of the final battle between the Zell and the Tong before the volcano went off would be the basis for Imperial City on Coruscant, the capital of the Empire, and where a lot of Shadows of the Empire takes place. So McNeely used parts from this poem for the choir chant where he saw fit, regardless of context. Da Werda Verda would be built upon in the Republic Commando video game, where it was reworked as a Mandalorian war chant for the clone commandos, and the new language was dubbed as the canon Mandalorian language. Isn't that exciting?
Talk, stop, rock, rock up, yeah, key, stack up, rock up,
The Dark Horse Comics team, they were going to go a little deeper with the bounty hunters. It was like Boba Fett's bad week. IG-88 wanted a piece of them, and so that rivalry between those two was really cool to see in the comics.
Dark Horse had already published over 80 Star Wars comics before Shadows, most notably the popular Dark Empire series. Enter John Wagner as the writer of the Shadows comics. He was a co-creator of Judge Dredd and had previously written some Boba Fett comics at Dark Horse. He was a perfect fit for the Shadows comics, which was going to feature exclusive scenes of the famous bounty hunters. Comic artist Killian Plunkett was given the challenging task of drawing for Star Wars up to Lucasfilm's continuity standards. Certain challenges noted by Plunkett were Vader, with his dark, rigid shape and helmet reflections, which worked easily for film because the lights reflected naturally, but it was more difficult in static comic art. Capturing the likeness of real actors was another challenge. The comics also introduced two new characters. Jix, a spy who is hired by Vader because he doesn't trust Xizor, so Jix is instructed to go to Tatooine to ensure that Luke survives any assassination attempts by Jabba's thugs. Fun fact, Jix is based on a background extra in Return of the Jedi. The second new character is Big Giz. He's the leader of Jabba's swoop gang, out to kill Luke. Other than these new characters and the bounty hunter stuff, the comics pretty much just give a quick recap of the Shadows story. There were also some other comics, some mini-comics that came with the toys, and a pop-up comic about the bounty hunters. There was even a sequel spin-off about Guri, Xizor's sexy-ass assassin droid. But they were a good supplement to all the other content that was coming out at the time. And Dark Horse's comic art gives awesome interpretations of what was going on during the novel.
Prepare yourself for Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire. The cruel crime lord Xizor directs the carbonite capture of Han Solo and his imprisonment aboard bounty hunter Boba Fett's battle-ready Slave One. Now, Luke Skywalker goes undercover with Soldier of Fortune Dash Rendar as he rips through space in his battle-transforming Outrider. But can they stop Slave One in time? It's the ultimate ships for the ultimate battle. Dare to enter the Shadows, Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire. Figures and vehicles each sold separately from Kenner.
Lucasfilm used their license with Hasbro to produce a toy line under the Kenner name, to make numerous action figures for Shadows. Princess Leia and the bounty hunter Bosch's disguise. Chewbacca disguised as infamous bounty hunter Schnuva, with a blaster and vibroaxe that he never has or uses. Dash Rendar with a heavy weapons pack he never has or uses. Prince Xizor with energy fans that he never has or uses. Luke in his Coruscant Imperial disguise. These elite Red Guards were made for Shadows of the Empire by Jon Knoles. It comes with a stun baton that he never has or uses. There was also a Versus series pitting two characters against each other. These actually came with an issue of the Dark Horse comics. There was Xizor versus Darth Vader, where Xizor would get fucking rocked. Boba Fett versus IG-88 outside of their ships as opposed to inside their ships. There was also Boba Fett in the Slave One with Han and Carbonite, and a red Imperial version of a swoop bike rider, confusingly. The Outrider was also made, though it looked odd. And there were also plans to make a version of Xizor's Virago Star Viper, but it never happened. There were also plans for Guri with a big fucking gun. There was also a limited run of statues by a company called Applause. Oh hey look, I got it right here. There were only 5,000 of these ever made, so it's like kind of a big deal. Just kidding, it was like $60. There was also an amazing Xizor Applause statue.
The fool traded it to me for Eternian silver.
Other than those, there were also Micro Machines, Topps trading cards, embossed metal collectible cards. There was no shortage of toys to collect when Shadows was released. The story begins at the Battle of Hoth, during the events of The Empire Strikes Back. Dash Rendar is hired by the Rebellion to smuggle food supplies to Echo Base. This is also where the video game begins, but in the game, Dash is smuggling assault blasters instead of food.
Lebo, get this stuff offloaded and into those transports before they take off. I just found out the Empire is about to ruin our day. Han Solo told me that Imperial walkers have been spotted on the East Ridge. I'm gonna jump into a speeder and help rogue groups slow them down.
You'll pardon me for saying so, Captain, but it's been quite some time since you've flown an airspeeder in combat, and...
Don't get your servos in a twist, pal. Just make sure you collect the money for this load by the time I get back. And be sure to count it this time, will you?
After helping Rogue Squadron and the shield generator is destroyed, Dash returns to the base and escapes in his ship. At this point, Dash abandons his work for the Rebellion and disappears from the story for the time. The book begins with Vader speaking to the Emperor in Empire Strikes Back, and Prince Shizor is actually 4 meters away from Palpatine, and this is when Shizor learns that Luke Skywalker is Vader's son.
The son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi.
After having a talk with the Emperor, Shizor meets his assassin droid, Guri, who reports that the bounty on Luke Skywalker was successfully manipulated from wanted alive to wanted dead.
Your meeting with the Emperor went well as planned, Prince Shizor?
Of course. I promised 300 ships for His Majesty's construction project on Endor. I bowed and scraped to every one of Lord Vader's demands. They couldn't have found a more amenable business partner.
Or a more dangerous enemy.
You've informed Jabba's bounty hunters that Lord Vader's order to capture Luke Skywalker alive has now been changed?
Yes. And no one will know that the new order to kill Skywalker came from you.
Excellent. My hand must not be detected in this. Vader will surely suffer the Emperor's wrath when he fails to deliver Skywalker alive, as promised. With both of them out of our way, and the Emperor's growing dependence on Black Sun's substantial resources, there is no limit to the power I will attain.
Since Shizor knows that the Emperor is expecting Darth Vader to deliver Luke alive, he knows that killing Luke will make Vader look inept. He also has a personal vendetta against Vader, which will be revealed later in the story. This is where we fast forward through Empire. The most relevant plot points for Shadows of the Empire are that Han is frozen in carbonite and taken away by Boba Fett to Jabba's palace, and Vader still wants to find Luke and turn him to the dark side. Boba Fett is en route to Tatooine to deliver Solo to Jabba the Hutt, when rival bounty hunter IG-88 ambushes Fett to take Solo for himself. He takes out IG-88's ship, but Fett has to head to a nearby Imperial spaceport for repairs, on a moon called Gaul. IG-88 retreats to a salvage yard on Orb Mantell for his own repairs. In the video game, Dash is working with the Rebellion on a long-term basis and is helping hunt down Boba Fett but can't find him. But he does track down IG-88. He hijacks a train and smashes into the salvage depot where IG-88 is hiding. 88 runs some calculations and determines that he cannot be defeated, so he does the dumb villain thing and spouts vital information about Boba Fett's location.
Sounds like you got your wires crossed, IG-88.
As there is a 0% probability that you will survive this encounter, I see no risk in informing you that I have tracked my esteemed competitor to the Jar system, where he will soon lose Captain Solo to me. Now I must conclude this interruption. You will detain me no further.
Dash promptly defeats IG-88 and learns that Boba Fett is in the Jar system. Meanwhile, Luke, Lando, Leia, Chewie, and the droids are all on Tatooine, trying to avoid Imperial attention for a while after they were recently attacked. Luke is at Ben Kenobi's house, working on his Jedi training and building a new lightsaber from a book he found in the house. He doesn't have a lightsaber crystal, so he cooks up an artificial one in an easy bake oven, which takes about 1 month. Over in Mos Eisley Cantina, Lando meets with Leia and Chewbacca. Lando tells Leia that he gets a tip from a reliable, unnamed third party that Boba Fett is headed to Gaul, and that he'd contact an old acquaintance of his, Dash Rendar, to check it out, who in the book is coincidentally hanging out in the Jar system at the time. So Lando, Leia, Luke, Chewie head to a secret rebel moon base near Gaul called Kyle. This is where they first meet Dash Rendar. Meanwhile, at Gaul Spaceport, in the cantina, Boba Fett meets up with Bosk and Zuckuss, who offer a truce to work together to deliver Han more safely to Tatooine and to split the bounty. Boba Fett realizes that it's an ambush and kills the sniper who was set up to kill him, and then he escapes from the cantina. Luke and Rogue Squadron head to the orbit over Gaul to attack the Empire and create a diversion for the heroes to sneak onto the planet. The heroes consist of Lando, Leia, Chewie, and Dash. Dash leads the Falcon through the Grand Trench Canyon towards the Imperial spaceport where Fett is hiding. They spot the slave one and head towards it, but then TIE fighters react and attack them. At this point, Dash dips out, saying he's not paid for this shit. Once again, he disappears from the story for a time. Under attack by TIE fighters, Lando and Leia and the Millennium Falcon are overwhelmed and are forced to abandon the mission. While the Falcon is trying to attack the Slave One, Fett gets back to his ship and finds 4-LOM in it, with some other bounty hunters trying to steal Han Solo. He blasts 4-LOM to pieces and kills the other goons. In the game, the attack on Gaul is drastically different. Dash hunts Boba Fett alone.
Before I fried his circuits, IG-88 said Boba Fett is here in the Jar system. Most likely, he's at the Imperial moon base on Gaul. Now that we're on the Empire's hit list, the only way in there without being blasted out of the sky is to hide the ship in Smuggler's Gorge. Then I'll have to sneak in the hard way. It looks like I go in on foot from here.
He also finds a jetpack, which is exclusive to the video game, and he finds Boba Fett and defeats him, but he's chased off by the Empire. But yeah, in the book, he just fucking dips. Meanwhile, over on Coruscant, Shizor meets with Vader, and Vader reiterates that he doesn't trust Shizor for shit. Shizor then gives Vader the location of a secret rebel shipyard, knowing that the Emperor will send Vader there whether he likes it or not. And Vader gets more pissed, and he gets more suspicious of Shizor of doing something. Back over Gaul, one of Rogue Squadron's astromech droids goes rogue and takes control of Wes's X-Wing, trying to blast Luke's X-Wing and kill him. Thanks to the Force, Luke senses the lethal shots and dodges and maneuvers to shoot the haywire astromech droid, without destroying Wes's X-Wing. Our heroes reconvene at the Rebel moonbase and learn that the rogue astromech droid was purposely programmed to assassinate Luke. The spy lashes out and tries to kill Luke on the spot, barely missing Luke's head. Wedge quick draws his blaster and puts a bolt in the spy's chest. They find that the spy's bank account is linked to a dummy corporation they believe to be Vader's, so they suspect that the Empire is behind this assassination. Dash reconvenes with the rebels and says, "Lol, my bad." Leia asks Luke to go back to Tatooine to lay low for a while they investigate the assassination. Leia also asks Dash in secret to follow and protect Luke while she, Lando, and Chewie go to Rhodia where they have a contact to get in touch with Black Sun. They want to go off the grid to find intel on Luke's assassination, even if it means going to the largest criminal syndicate in the galaxy. They head to Rhodia, the planet with the Greedo people, and eventually get a meeting with Guri. Guri is Prince Shizor's personal advisor, a hot-pants blonde human replica droid who's fast as shit and stronger than a Wookiee. Shizor also implies that he bangs her when he's lonely. Shizor also secretly wants to bang Leia because she's a smart, pretty, independent woman. So he has Guri arrange to bring Leia to Shizor's palace on Coruscant to discuss the assassination among other business, if you know what I'm saying. Luke and Dash Rendar both go to Tatooine. Dash hangs out in Mos Eisley and overhears Jabba's gang talk about going to kill Luke at Ben's house and decides to follow them. Luke heads back to old Ben's house on Tatooine to finish building his lightsaber made out of spare parts from Mos Eisley and a home-cooked crystal, and he turns it on for the first time. While he's doing this, he sees Jabba's swoop thugs in the distance and hides behind some rocks. Eventually, the swoop gang spots him, and Luke uses his own lightsaber in combat for the first time. Luke jacks a swoop bike and heads to Beggar's Canyon in a high-speed chase. But Luke is still outnumbered even in Beggar's Canyon, when Dash suddenly appears on a speeder bike and saves Luke from overwhelming odds. They head back to Old Ben's house when they notice a data pod dropping nearby. They go and check it out and find that it has a message from the Bothan Spynet leader and he needs to speak with Leia. Since Leia's busy on Rhodia investigating the assassination, Dash and Luke head to Kothlis themselves to represent the rebellion. In the comics, the Beggar's Canyon chase is slightly different. Jabba's swoop gang is joined by one of Vader's spies, Jix. During the swoop gang attack, Jix fires a premature shot at Luke, giving him a heads up, telling his gang that he thought he had a clear shot. Eventually, once the gang is chasing Luke through Beggar's Canyon, Jix actually kills the leader, Big Giz, to further ensure that Luke isn't hunted anymore. Giz utters his last words, "Higgle baggle." In the game, Luke never even sees a swoop gang member. Dash is in Mos Eisley and gets a hint that the swoop gang's heading over to Ben Kenobi's house to kill Luke.
Jabba will pay extra to the one who blasts his bones.
Let's fry him.
Dash follows and kills every swoop gang leader in Mos Eisley and in Beggar's Canyon. When Dash gets to Old Ben's house, Luke is just chilling in a speeder bike in his Return of the Jedi clothes. And he already has the information from the data pod that would have landed.
They worked for Jabba the Hutt and they had orders to kill you.
But something's not right. I have a feeling someone else is pulling Jabba's strings. Where's Leia now?
Leia's trying to find answers, Luke. She thinks by infiltrating Black Sun's spy network, she'll find out who's behind this.
Black Sun? One of their agents just delivered to us the time and route of an Imperial freighter. Supposedly, it's carrying an encoded supercomputer with detailed plans for a major Imperial construction project.
I wouldn't trust those gangsters if I were you.
I don't trust them, but we can't afford not to check it out. It may be vital to the Alliance. Want to come along, Dash?
Why not? Gotta earn my pay.
Meanwhile, Vader's taking care of the rebel base that Shizor gave him information about. Vader gets into a fighter, and Imperial forces overwhelm the asteroid base. Vader has a moment of disgust of how easy it is to destroy the rebel shipyard. While flying his interceptor, ready to destroy the last X-Wing, he lets the fighter go. Vader wants an equal challenge, and the proud warrior inside of him doesn't enjoy the political dance that Shizor and the Emperor are making him do. This is one of many characterization bits for Vader in the book, and his anger of putting up with Shizor is going to come into play later. Meanwhile, aboard the Slave One, 4-LOM secretly repairs himself among the other corpses in the ship. Bosk and Zuckuss track down 4-LOM's location and ambush the Slave One, prompting Boba to say, "What?" Boba kills 4-LOM, but not before 4-LOM damages the Slave One's weapon systems. Zuckuss and a group of bounty hunters board the Slave One, and Fett's captured. But he tricks his captor, gets his gun, and kills everyone but Zuckuss. Bosk, unknowing to what's happened on the ship, gets tricked by Fett. Fett forces Zuckuss to bait Bosk into attaching his ship, and Fett sets off explosives, damaging the Hound's tooth. Slave One jumps into hyperspace, and Zuckuss is captured by Fett, leaving Bosk in ruins. Meanwhile, Dash and Luke head to Kothlis, and they meet up with the Bothan spy master, Saintmillion. The Bothans tell Luke and Dash that they're preparing an assault on an Imperial freighter Saprosa, which has serious construction plans aboard. They felt like it might be relevant to the rebellion, which they're sympathetic for, so they want to get them involved. The Bothans' intelligence was correct, and they intercept the Imperial freighter over Bothawi. So they approach the freighter Saprosa to take it hostage, when the Imperial freighter surprises them with hidden missile compartments. Dash tries to shoot one of the missiles out of the sky, and thinks he's hitting it, but he can't take it out, and it kills 8 Bothans. 4 more Bothans die in the onslaught when Luke finally disables the freighter's engines.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
Dash is shocked that he couldn't hit the missile and let the Bothans die, and he becomes horribly depressed. The Imperial freighter surrenders to the rebels. The Bothans board Saprosa and obtain the construction plans, about the size of a briefcase. As usual, the game is slightly different. In the game, Luke and Dash make a leisurely flight to the Saprosa, and Dash boards, blasting his way through the corridors, and finds the large supercomputer containing the plans. The Outrider swoops in and picks them up after fighting a loader droid. Meanwhile, Shizor and the Emperor are having lunch together, and they're replaying footage of the attack on the Imperial freighter. The Emperor warns Shizor that his plan had better work. The plan to purposely give the rebellion the plans to the second Death Star, which is what was on the Imperial freighter. Shizor reiterates that the rebellion will trust the Black Sun more, and he'll be able to deliver the rebellion into his hands. In a trap. It's a trap. Shizor is skillfully playing for both sides, so if the rebellion or the Empire wins the war, he'll have leverage by saying that he helped either side. Vader sort of realizes this, and he gets more pissed. The Emperor likely also sees this, but he likes trolling Vader, so he lets Shizor give the plans away anyways. Once the rebels and the Bothans have the plans from the Imperial freighter, Dash decides he doesn't need to guard Luke anymore and heads to Rhodia to join up with Lando, Leia, and Chewie. Luke heads back to Kothlis with the Bothan spy master to have the plans decoded by expert Bothan slicers. When Luke and Koth get to the base, it's attacked by a bunch of bounty hunters, made up of Barabels and Niktos mostly, who kill many Bothans, including Saintmillion.
Many Bothans died.
Yeah, we get it. Go away now. One of the Bothans sneaks away through a secret door with the Death Star plans. The kidnappers take Luke alive, letting him know that there are 2 bounties on him, dead and alive. And they're negotiating with both parties, which are, secretly, the Empire and Black Sun. These bounty hunters are trying to get maximum profit from either side. This gives Luke time to escape his cell with a Jedi mind trick. He finds his lightsaber, and he tries to fight his way out, but he's once again overrun, until Lando blasts through the wall and helps Luke escape in the Falcon. Meanwhile, back on Imperial City in Coruscant, the Emperor sends Vader to Kothlis to collect Luke personally. They want to make it seem like the Empire considers the captured plans so serious that Vader himself would be sent there, making their plans to make the leaked information seem real more convincing. Vader disagrees because he knows Xizor is going to be up to some bullshit while he's gone, but he has to do it because the Emperor told him so. Vader arrives to Kothlas, and just as Luke is escaping, they sense each other's presence. The Falcon gets away, and Vader lands on Kothlas to interrogate some bounty hunters. Using the dark side, he tortures one of them, learning that the death bounty on Luke is likely coming from Black Sun. Confirming his suspicions about Xizor, he vows to find proof that he can bring to the Emperor that Xizor is interfering with turning Skywalker to the dark side. And then he makes a metaphor about sand, and how he'll finally bury Xizor in sand.
By itself, a grain of sand was nothing, but with enough grains, one could cover a city. It would not do to tip my hand too early. As of now, I have enough sand to begin. A bit more sand, and I'll be able to bury Xizor in sand. I love sand.
While bringing Leia and Chewbacca to Coruscant, Guri gives them both disguises of bounty hunters. Leia disguised as Boushh, a late bounty hunter who pissed Xizor off, and Chewie as Snuva, a well-known successful Wookiee bounty hunter. They even gave him a fresh flat-top haircut. Chewie and Leia meet up with Xizor, who starts to ooze his pheromones, getting Leia super hot and horny. And Xizor sends Chewie and Leia off to go their own rooms. Leia gets all dressed up and sexy, and they have a private meeting without Chewie. Leia tries to talk about the assassination when Xizor goes full send with his creepy pheromones, and Leia makes out with him until Chewie comes banging on the door, marching her ass out of the room. Leia gets pissed at Chewie for interrupting the first action she's had since episode 5, but eventually comes to her senses and realizes that Xizor is using creepy pheromones to get her horny. She also puts together something Xizor said during their makeout session, and realizes that he's the one behind the assassination attempts on Luke, and they need to send a request for help. Leia goes back to Xizor to stall long enough for Chewie to escape, and is now able to resist Xizor's creepy pheromones. She knees him in his lizard dick. Xizor sends Leia away and purposely allows Chewie to escape, setting up a trap for Luke. Leia is locked in her room and has no means of communication. Meanwhile, Xizor reflects on his nut pain, and considers banging Guri to let off some steam, further making him one of the creepiest Star Wars characters ever. Lando and Luke get Chewie's distress signal and head to Coruscant. They sneak past the Imperial blockade and get into the underworld, leaving the Falcon to R2 and 3PO, in case of emergency. They knock out and take Red Elite Stormtrooper disguises and find Chewbacca in hiding when they're attacked by anti-Imperial thugs. Once again, they're outnumbered when Dash Rendar, who also snuck onto Coruscant from Chewie's distress signal, comes in behind Luke and Lando and saves them from the underworld attackers with his sharp shooting. At this point, Dash recovers from his depression and he's a somewhat changed character. Less of a dick, more humbled, but still pretty smug. The crew heads to a dingy Coruscant motel to plan Leia's rescue. It's at this point that Dash gives Luke a change of clothes, his Return of the Jedi black clothing and robe. They also meet up with one of Dash's contacts on Coruscant, a sewer engineer, to find their way to Xizor's palace through the sewer system. At some point, Luke reaches out to Leia with the Force. Vader senses this too in his Super Star Destroyer that's hovering above Coruscant, but he's confused why there are two equally powerful Force users on Coruscant, and he thinks that Luke is somehow echoing his power in two locations, implying that Leia is about as strong in the Force as Luke. Also at the same time, Xizor senses danger in his future, implying that he may also be Force sensitive, and that these gut feelings have helped him climb the Black Sun ranks in the past. Maybe the Emperor sensed the Force inside of Xizor and wanted him to become his next apprentice if Vader failed him. Which makes sense because in the book, the Emperor is constantly testing Vader's patience by making him put up with Xizor's suspicious and cunning behavior. And I think the Emperor kind of likes Xizor's style too. What do you think Xizor's Darth name would be? I think it would be Darth Sexual Deviant. Also throughout the book, Vader practices dark side healing in order to breathe without a mask on. He eventually gets up to a couple minutes, using just his anger to fuel his healing. I think that this was written in for it to eventually come into play as he talks to Luke in his death throes in Return of the Jedi. Back in the sewers, the sewer guide helps them find their way through the pipes and up to Xizor's palace. Luke even kills a Dianoga with one lightsaber swipe. At some point, the guide feels threatened by the heroes and pulls a gun on Luke. Dash quick draws and puts a bolt in his forehead, and they sneak into the palace. This is a little different from the video game. All the heroes head into the sewers together, but they split up at some point, with their ships. Dash goes off alone and fights a giant Dianoga underwater, and they sneaks into the palace separately, sets ion charges that would destroy the palace.
The pulse bombs are set, and Luke has found Princess Leia. Just find a way out.
Dash also fights Shizor's gladiator droid after Shizor personally talks to Dash via hologram.
Captain Rendar, you have been a persistent thorn in my side, not to mention a most disruptive, uninvited guest at my palace.
As the heroes storm Shizor's palace, Vader's intelligence team brings back some information about Shizor. Back in the day, Vader had a secret biological experiment on the Falleen home planet. Something went wrong with the experiment, and the bioweapon contaminated millions of Falleen. To contain the disease, Vader genocided the race, killing millions, including Shizor's royal family. Evidence of this was erased by Shizor, but somehow Vader's agents found this information, giving Vader more knowledge of Shizor's motives: revenge against Vader. Dash, Luke, and Lando are sneaking through Shizor's palace. When Shizor realizes that his palace is being invaded, he sounds the alarm and grabs a modified blaster pistol to go kill Luke himself. The heroes continue rushing through Shizor's palace, while Leia tricks Guri into her room and bonks her on the head with a helmet, and locks her inside. Guri, the human replica assassin droid who can kill without raising her heartbeat, with no conscience, who costs 9 million credits, gets bonked on the head by Leia's helmet, completely taking her out. Leia gets away and runs into Luke, Lando, Dash, and Chewie. Eventually, Black Sun guards, Guri, and Shizor himself corner the heroes. Shizor recognizes everyone except Dash Rendar, simply referring to him as somebody he's never seen or heard of before. In parts of the book, Shizor's mentioned he's jealous of the Bothan spy net, so the Black Sun spy net must really suck if he doesn't know who Dash is. Shizor actually manages to get a couple shots off at Luke directly, but Luke deflects the blasts. And then the heroes are outnumbered by Shizor's guards. At this point, Lando reveals to his team that he has 3 thermal detonators. Leia yoinks one of them and pockets it for later use, which you see in Return of the Jedi, but Luke takes one of them, and he holds it on a dead man's switch, a setting on a thermal detonator where if the person lets it go, it immediately detonates. This forces Shizor to halt fire. As the heroes start to leave, Lando takes the 3rd thermal detonator and puts it on a 5-minute timer, and he drops it down a garbage chute right in front of everybody, with a shit-eating grin on his face. Panic immediately ensues. Shizor's men hilariously just quit their job on the spot and leave. During the chaos, Guri tries to stop the heroes, and Luke takes her on 1v1. Guri taunts Luke into unarmed combat. Luke uses force speed to enhance his fighting capabilities and easily puts down the human replica droid. He spares her, telling her that she should join the rebellion, but her programming tells her that she has to refuse, and she escapes. Our heroes are picked up by R2 and C-3PO during the explosion of the palace. Shizor escapes in his own custom Star Viper ship, and almost hits a YT freighter, not initially realizing it's the Millennium Falcon, and he heads to his skyhook that hovers above Coruscant. A skyhook is a lavish type of repulsor craft only owned by the incredibly wealthy. The Emperor also has a skyhook, and there's a story about how Shizor tries to steal the Emperor's gardener, but the gardener has an unfortunate trip down an elevator shaft once the Emperor learns about it. As Shizor approaches his skyhook, he realizes the freighter he passed was the Falcon, and notifies the Black Sun Navy commander on the skyhook to destroy the Falcon and kill Skywalker. Just as he's shutting his comms off, he mutters Skywalker's name. Meanwhile, across Coruscant, Vader's Super Star Destroyer intercepts this communication. Vader's agents are scanning all communications for any mention of the name Skywalker, and this communication is brought to him. Seeing that Shizor does mention Skywalker by name, and that he's going to kill him, Vader finally has the evidence he needs to take action against Shizor for treason. And since Palpatine is away from Coruscant playing golf on the 2nd Death Star, Vader's in charge of Coruscant, and heads for the skyhook to confront Shizor. Our heroes leave in the Falcon, and Dash boards his Outrider in orbit, very close to the skyhook that hovers above Shizor's destroyed palace, when suddenly they're attacked by Black Sun Star Vipers. Luke and Lando pilot the Millennium Falcon, while Chewie and Leia man the turrets. While the Falcon and Outrider try to avoid the Star Vipers, there's still tons of civilian traffic around the skyhook. Numerous civilian ships are destroyed by Black Sun's reckless pilots. The Falcon and Outrider start to get overwhelmed, and Shizor's commander even says that they'll need a miracle to survive, which seems to be taken to heart in the final level of the video game, which starts out infamously fucking hard, and you need multiple lives to survive this level on higher difficulties. You crash your ship, you better climb to the next one you see and get back in the air, sister. Too much time goes by and you don't. You get afraid to fly. When all hope is lost, Rogue Squadron shows up in the nick of time to help the heroes, thanks to a message that was sent to the Alliance by Lebo, Dash's droid co-pilot. Shizor lands his Star Viper on the Skyhook and starts speaking with his commander on comms. Although Rogue Squadron showed up to help, Shizor still has numbers over the heroes, and it looks like the battle's going to be won when suddenly the Executor hops out of hyperspace next to the Skyhook. Vader deploys his TIE fighters, and shockingly, they pass the rebels and start destroying the Star Vipers instead. Shizor opens comms with Vader, and Vader demands Shizor's surrender, giving him 2 minutes to give himself up to the Empire under the charge of treason. Under the onslaught from the Imperial Navy, the Black Sun commander begs Shizor for the order to surrender. Shizor remains silent on his Skyhook for the last 2 minutes, and it's unknown what was going through his mind or what happened during those final minutes. But time runs out, and Vader fires on and completely destroys the Skyhook, killing all aboard. The debris nearly takes out the Falcon, and Luke sees Dash's ship disappear in a major collision of debris. Dash is assumed dead. Luke and Lando are kind of shaken up by his death. In the comic, they make a half-interested comment about his death and immediately move on. The Skyhook battle in the game is much different. Luke is somehow in his X-Wing, confusingly, since he came in on the Falcon. This is a major continuity error. I'm on to you, John. The Outrider and Falcon chase Shizor up to the Skyhook that's sitting in open space with no civilians and start fighting the Black Sun Star Vipers. They're overwhelmed when both Rogue Squadron and an Imperial Star Destroyer arrives. Not exactly Vader's executor. The X-Wings and TIE Fighters join the fray. Dash proceeds to enter the Skyhook and fire missiles on the power core, destroying the Skyhook, and Dash is presumed dead.
Let's get out of here! Wait, where's Dash? Must not have made it out of the Skyhook before it flew. I can't believe Dash didn't make it, Leia. He was such a great pilot.
I know, Luke, but he didn't die in vain. Thanks to him, the Alliance no longer has anything to fear from Black Sun, and the Imperial computer he captured is being decoded right now. It may well contain information worth the price he paid with his life.
Captain, I do not understand. Why do you not want Commander Skywalker and the others to know that we survived and made the jump to hyperspace?
Well, as much fun as that was, I don't see us joining the ranks of that crazy rebellion. Too dangerous and too much money to be made elsewhere, my friend. On top of that, someone from Black Sun will take Shizor's place. And when that happens, you can bet your servo motors they'll send every thug in the galaxy after us. But if everyone thinks we're dead, who's gonna be looking? Besides, it's good to be remembered as a martyr without actually having to be dead, wouldn't you say?
The Emperor pretends to be upset with Vader over destroying the Skyhook and killing Shizor, but then kind of laughs about Shizor being dead. The heroes head back to a secret rebel base and mention that the Bothans learned that the missile that Dash couldn't destroy back during the Saprosa incident actually had experimental diamond armor. So Dash actually couldn't have destroyed it, so it's not really his fault that the Bothans died. The book finally ends with Luke recording his message to Jabba on Tatooine at Old Ben's house, as they prepare to rescue Han, leading directly into Return of the Jedi. And then finally, in the comic, Fett and Zuckuss land on Tatooine to deliver Han Solo to Jabba the Hutt. As Fett gets out of the ship with Han on a hoverlift, he's ambushed by Bossk and Jabba's swoop gang. A chase ensues and Bossk captures Han. At this point, it's revealed that Boba Fett is actually just Zuckuss dressed up in Mandalorian armor, and the hover cart that was supposedly carrying Han Solo is filled with 4-LOM's trashed remains. Meanwhile, Fett delivers Han to Jabba the Hutt, pain-free and unscathed. The comics end with Vader reflecting on the recent events, watching over the construction of the second Death Star. And there you have it, a comprehensive look at the Shadows of the Empire multimedia project. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, and check out the Patreon link in the description if you want to support the channel and get early looks at upcoming videos. Catch you later.